Chosen one, God said he has been waiting a long time. And finally, someone actually did it. You. Not because you were perfect. Not because you never broke down at 3 a.m. on your kitchen floor. Not because you had all the right words when life knocked the breath clean out of you, but because in the hidden place when nobody was watching, when nobody was clapping, when the silence was so loud it felt like abandonment, you stayed. That is what heaven has been waiting for. I need you to hear something that most people will go their entire lives never understanding. The waiting was not punishment. The silence was not rejection. Every year that felt like delay, every door that wouldn't open, every prayer that seemed to evaporate before it hit the ceiling, that was not God turning away. That was God building, like a craftsman who refuses to rush the structure because he knows exactly how much weight it must carry. You kept showing up while nobody clapped. You obeyed when obedience cost you something real. You held on when life handed you more reasons to quit than continue. And beloved, silence is where weak faith goes to die. But you are still here, which means what grew inside you was never weak. It was a seed. And a seed looks buried to the world, but in heaven it is being prepared to split open. In just a few minutes, I am going to show you the 6 hidden signs that prove your faith has finally matured into something heaven can release blessing through. And before this message ends, I am going to reveal the one final inner barrier that still stands between chosen people and everything heaven already prepared for them. Stay with me, because this is not a motivational message. This is a revelation about what God has been quietly, patiently, deliberately building inside of you. You thought heaven was waiting on a door to open, but heaven was waiting on you. If this word is already moving in your spirit, type finally in the comments right now, because your finally has arrived. Let me ask you something nobody else has been bold enough to ask you. How many times did you look up at heaven and whisper, not shout, not cry, just whisper, "Did you forget me?" How many birthdays passed? How many New Year's mornings came and went, where you sat quietly, alone, wondering if this would finally be the year? How many times did you watch someone else step into the very thing you had been praying for, and you smiled for them on the outside, while something cracked just a little deeper on the inside? You thought delay meant denial. You thought closed doors meant God changed his mind. You thought the silence meant heaven had simply moved on. And here is the part that breaks my heart, because I have sat with enough people across enough decades to know this truth deeply. Many of you did not just wait. You slowly, quietly, painfully adjusted your hope downward, just to survive the disappointment. You stopped asking for the big thing. You started asking for just enough. You buried the dream so deep that after a while, you almost forgot you ever had it. Almost. But beloved, I need you to hear this right now, and I need you to receive it not just in your mind, but in the place where the hurt actually lives. The delay was never the verdict. It was the process. Joseph received his promise at 17 years old. 17. A dream so vivid, so God-breathed, that it terrified his own brothers. But fulfillment? Fulfillment did not come for 22 years. 22 years of pit, of prison, of silence, of waiting in places that made no sense for a man with a promise that size. Was God absent? Was God distracted? Had heaven moved on? No. Heaven was building the interior life that could carry the exterior assignment. Moses spent 40 years in the desert. 40 years. By human math, that looks like waste. By heaven's math, that was the most important classroom of his life. The burning bush did not find a reckless young man. It found a man whose ego had been refined, whose patience had been forged, whose obedience had been tested in absolute obscurity. David was anointed king while Saul still sat on the throne, anointed but not yet enthroned, chosen but not yet revealed. And in that gap, in that brutal, confusing, dangerous gap, God was not ignoring David. God was forming the shepherd's heart that a king would need. Write this down. Delay is not always a no. Sometimes it is God building capacity. A bridge is not open to traffic the moment the blueprints are drawn. Engineers test it, they stress it, they apply weight before they trust it with weight. Because a bridge that collapses under pressure does not just fail, it destroys everything on it. Heaven does not place kingdom weight on structures that collapse under pressure. And some of you, the very reason the blessing has not yet arrived is not because God withheld it in anger. It is because the container was not yet strong enough to hold it without breaking you. The blessing needed a container. Not just desire, not just tears, not just prayer volume. A container. So let me ask you the question that changes everything. What was God waiting to see in you that finally appeared? It was not louder prayer. It was not more performance. It was not a more impressive spiritual resume. It was something quieter than all of that. Something that only gets built in the hidden place. Something that cannot be manufactured on a Sunday morning or performed for an audience. It was the thing that grew in you during the years nobody saw, during the seasons nobody applauded, during the nights you chose faithfulness when bitterness would have been so much easier to carry. And here is the truth that should shake something loose in your spirit right now. The delay was never empty. It was crowded with invisible construction, crowded with divine preparation, crowded with the kind of spiritual engineering that only happens when no one is watching and the pressure is real. If you have ever mistaken silence for rejection, stay with me to the end of this message, because what I am about to show you has the power to heal something in you that has been quietly bleeding for years, because we have named the wound. We have looked at the misreading honestly. We have sat with the pain of years that felt like loss. But now I need to show you what heaven was actually doing while you were waiting, because the 6 signs I am about to reveal, they are not future predictions. They are evidence of what has already been built inside of you. And once you see them, once you recognize them in your own story, you will never read your past the same way again. Let me tell you what you actually did, not what you think you did, not what it looked like from the outside, what you actually did in the quiet, in the dark, in the years nobody photographed or applauded or even noticed. You trusted God when trusting cost you something real. You obeyed when there was no reward waiting on the other side of that obedience. You forgave someone who never apologized. You walked away from something that would have destroyed you, even when part of you wanted to stay. You kept praying when the ceiling felt like concrete. You kept showing up to a God who felt silent, and you showed up anyway. That is not small. That is the rarest thing on earth. Because here is what most people do not understand about faith. Most people believe faith is something you perform on Sunday morning, something you display when the music swells and the room is full and everybody around you is lifting their hands. But God is not measuring your Sunday performance. He is watching your Tuesday at midnight. He is watching what you do when the answer still has not come, when the doctor's report did not change, when the money did not appear, when the person you loved walked out anyway. When you had every reason, every legitimate, understandable, human reason to become hard, to become bitter, to close yourself off and say, "I am done believing," and you did not. Proverbs 20:6 asks one of the most devastating questions in all of Scripture. It says, "Many will say they are loyal friends, but who can find one who is truly reliable?" Who can find one who is truly reliable? Heaven has been asking that question over your life for years. And finally, the answer came back the same way. 3 times in a row, 5 times, 10 times, 100 quiet moments in a row. Reliable. This one is reliable. Anyone can look polished in public, but oil is not made in the spotlight. Oil is made in crushing. Every olive that ever produced oil was first pressed under enormous weight, and the crushing did not ruin it. The crushing is what released everything valuable inside it. Beloved, the pressure you have been under was not destroying you, it was producing you. Heaven was not admiring your shine. It was measuring what remained after the fire, and what remained was you, still standing, still soft, still willing, still faithful. That is what finally moved heaven. Not perfection, not the loudest prayer, not the most impressive spiritual resume. Consistency. In private, when it cost you everything and rewarded you nothing, you became the same person in the dark that you claimed to be in the light. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand that most people, even deeply religious people, crack in the hidden place? They perform in public and collapse in private. They shout victory on Sunday and negotiate with bitterness by Wednesday. But not you. Think about Daniel. He did not pray loudly to be seen. He went to his room, opened his window toward Jerusalem, and prayed 3 times a day, even when it was declared illegal, even when it meant the lion's den. Nobody was clapping, nobody was watching. He was faithful in private, and heaven moved publicly on his behalf. Think about Ruth. She had every right to go home. Naomi released her. The road was long, the future was uncertain. But Ruth said, "Where you go, I will go." That quiet, unseen decision to remain loyal when loyalty was not required, that single act of hidden faithfulness placed her in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Hidden faithfulness always produces eternal fruit. And here is what I need you to sit with for just a moment. You have been so focused on what has not happened yet, the door that has not opened, the blessing that has not arrived, the breakthrough that feels perpetually one season away, that you have not stopped to recognize what has already happened inside you. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago. You are not as easily shaken. You are not as desperate for human approval. You are not as willing to compromise what God built in you just to get temporary relief. That transformation did not happen because life got easier. It happened because you got stronger. And you got stronger because you stayed faithful when staying faithful made no logical sense. James 1-4 says it plainly, "Let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." Lacking nothing. That is the destination of a faith that endured. If God has been teaching you in the private place, do not scroll away from this moment. Share this with someone who feels forgotten, because this word may be the very thing that restores the meaning of their waiting. Because here is what is coming next. There are 6 deep, specific signs that reveal whether this transformation has truly taken root inside you. Signs that go far beneath the surface. Signs that most people miss entirely, even in themselves. One of them may expose a shift in you that you did not even realize had happened. And that revelation changes everything. Let me ask you something nobody else is going to ask you today. What if the very things that made you feel like you were falling behind, the silence, the stillness, the slow burning patience you had to fight for every single morning, what if those were not signs of weakness? What if they were evidence that something in you has already changed? Because here is what I know after a lifetime of watching God move in people's lives. The most dangerous assumption a chosen person can make is this, that because nothing looks different on the outside, nothing has changed on the inside. That is a lie that has kept more people from their breakthrough than any enemy ever could. So right now, I want to show you 3 signs, not theories, not spiritual platitudes. Real, specific, recognizable signs that your faith has quietly, painfully, beautifully matured into something heaven can finally move through. Sign number 1. Silence feels full, not empty. There was a time in your life when God going quiet felt like a death sentence, When you stopped hearing a clear word, when the prayers felt like they were bouncing off the ceiling, when the confirmations dried up, you panicked. You assumed the worst. You started questioning everything. But something shifted in you, didn't it? You cannot name exactly when it happened, but somewhere along the way, the silence stopped terrifying you. It started speaking to you instead. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Not be still and wonder if he forgot you. Not be still and spiral. Be still and know. That word know is not passive. It is a declaration of settled trust. And settled trust is not where you started. It is where faith brings you after the fire. Beloved, a mature spirit does not need constant noise to feel secure. Still water does not need to splash to prove it is alive. When you can sit in the silence of heaven and feel depth instead of dread, that is not emptiness, that is roots. And roots are what happen underground, where nobody sees, where nobody claps. Sign number 2, you loosened your grip on control. This one is going to land hard, because control is the addiction nobody talks about in church. You wanted the promise, you still want it, but somewhere in the wrestling, somewhere in the years of planning and pushing and trying to make the timeline move faster, you let go, not because you stopped believing, but because you finally believed enough to trust that God's timing is not a delay, it is a design. Proverbs 3:5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." All your heart, not most of it, not the parts that aren't scared, all of it. You used to knock on doors God had not opened yet. You used to force conversations, force connections, force seasons that were not ready. And every time the door stayed shut, it felt like failure. But now, you walk past closed doors differently, not with defeat, with discernment. That is not passivity, that is power, because the person who no longer worships the timeline has just become dangerous to every plan of darkness built around your exhaustion. The enemy's greatest weapon against you was never your sin, it was your impatience, and you just disarmed him. Sign number 3. Comparison lost its power over you. Tell me the truth. There were seasons when someone else's blessing felt like your verdict, when someone younger got promoted, when someone who seemed less faithful got the breakthrough, when the person who quit twice received what you had been standing for years, and it cut you deep. But something changed, didn't it? You still notice. You are human, but it no longer bleeds the way it used to. Other people's seasons no longer make you feel erased from God's memory. Galatians 6:4 says, "Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else." The strongest trees are not obsessed with what the tree beside them looks like. They are growing where nobody can see, underground, in the dark, building a root system so strong that when the storm comes, they do not bend, they anchor everything around them. That is what God has been building in you while you were busy worrying about everyone else's story. You stopped bleeding over their chapter because you finally started trusting yours. And here is what I need you to hear before we go any deeper. These 3 changes did not come cheap. They came through disappointment, through years, through prayers that felt unanswered, and mornings that felt unbearable. You did not wake up one day and decide to be mature. Life pressed it into you, and you let it. Maybe the reason you feel unfamiliar to yourself right now is not because you lost something. It is because faith has finally outgrown fear. If one of these signs is describing your life type, I'm changing in the comments right now, because the next 3 signs go even deeper. And one of them explains exactly why some people are closest to their breakthrough at the very moment they feel the least impressive. Stay with me, because this is where the message turns personal. You made it this far, and that alone tells me something, because most people scroll past the moment it gets too real. but you are still here, which means what I am about to say next, your spirit already knows it is true. Sign 4. Your prayers became quieter, but heavier. There was a time your prayers were loud, urgent, full of desperation and noise. You begged, you bargained, you wept until your voice gave out. And then something shifted. You stopped performing your prayers. You stopped trying to convince God with volume. You started walking into that quiet place and simply surrendering. That is not weakness. That is the most dangerous kind of faith on earth. Philippians 4:7 says, "The peace of God surpasses all understanding," not all feeling, all understanding. Meaning you cannot think your way into it. You can only surrender your way into it. Beloved, immature faith is loud because it is afraid silence means nothing is happening. But mature faith is quiet because it finally trusts that God is already moving. Your prayer stopped sounding like a speech and started sounding like trust. Heaven heard that shift, and heaven said, finally. Sign 5. Your definition of enough changed. Let me ask you something direct. When was the last time you needed someone to validate you to feel whole? When was the last time a closed door made you question your worth? When was the last time you chased something not because God placed it in your heart, but because you needed to prove something to somebody who doubted you? If your honest answer is not recently, then hear me clearly. That is a sign, because the version of you that needed applause to feel chosen, that version could not be trusted with what God is preparing, not because you were bad, but because the blessing would have fed your wound instead of your purpose. 1 Timothy 6:6 says, "Godliness with contentment is great gain, not godliness with achievement, not godliness with recognition, contentment." You stopped needing the room to applaud you. You stopped measuring your worth by your bank account, your title, your zip code, your family's opinion. Contentment is not defeat. Contentment is the quiet confidence of someone who finally knows God is enough. And when God is enough, you become dangerous to darkness. Sign 6. Closed doors no longer humiliate you. This one right here, this is where most people still get stuck. Because when a door closes, the enemy does not just close the door. He whispers while it's closing. He says, "You see that? That means you are not good enough. That means God skipped you. That means everyone else gets the blessing and you get the waiting room." And for years, maybe decades, you believed him. But something changed in you, didn't it? The last time a door closed, you did not collapse. You did not spiral. You stood there, and something deep inside you whispered back, "That was not my door." Romans 8:28 says, "All things work together for good." Not some things, all things, including the closed doors, including the lost opportunities, including the relationships that ended, the jobs that fell through, the plans that crumbled in your hands. You stopped seeing punishment. You started seeing precision. And that right there is the mark of someone heaven can finally trust with more. The mid-video revelation. God is not saying finally because you became louder. He is saying finally because you became safer. Safer emotionally, you no longer need the blessing to complete you. Safer spiritually, you are no longer using God as a vending machine. Safer in motive, you stopped asking what's in it for me and started asking what am I built to carry. Safer in stewardship, you proved in the small things that you could be trusted with the large things. Luke 16:10, "Whoever is faithful in little is faithful in much." The question heaven has been asking over your life is not, does this person want it? Heaven has been asking, can this person carry it without it destroying their peace? Can you hold the weight of answered prayer without losing the humility that made you ready for it? That is the real question. And your life has been answering it quietly, faithfully, in every hidden moment nobody saw but God. The vessel had to be ready before the oil could be poured, because some blessings are heavier than they look. and a cracked vessel cannot carry a heavy blessing, it only leaks it. But you have been sealed by endurance, strengthened by silence, prepared by everything that tried to break you and failed. If this message is hitting your spirit right now, like this video and share it immediately. Let this word find the person sitting somewhere in this country who has convinced themselves that God forgot them. And if you are still here, that is not coincidence. That may be the clearest sign you have received all week, because there is still one more thing I need to show you. Even now, after all 6 signs, one final inner wound still keeps many chosen people from stepping fully into what God has already prepared. And that wound is not what you think it is. It is deeper than delay. It is older than disappointment. And it is the very thing heaven is ready to heal right now. Let me ask you something that nobody has ever asked you directly. What if the delay was never the problem? What if you were, not because you were bad, not because you were broken beyond repair, but because what God was preparing to place on your life, the weight of it, the scope of it, the sheer magnitude of what heaven had already written over you, required a version of you that did not yet exist. And that version could not be downloaded overnight. It had to be built. Here is what most people never understand about divine timing. God was not waiting because he was uncertain about you. God was not hesitating because he changed his mind. God was waiting because maturity cannot be microwaved, capacity cannot be faked, and a structure rushed before it is ready does not stand. It collapses under the very blessing it was meant to carry. Think about that. How many people prayed for increase and got it too soon and watched it destroy them? How many people begged God for the door to open, and when it did, they walked in unprepared, overwhelmed, and walked right back out, defeated? God loves you too much to set you up like that. So he built you instead, through repetition, through disappointment, through years of restraint when everything in you wanted to move and heaven said not yet, through hidden obedience that earned you not one single round of applause, through surviving seasons so silent you wondered if God had simply moved on without you. That was not punishment, that was training. Capacity is spiritual muscle, and muscle is never built in comfort. It is built under resistance. Every weight you carried that felt too heavy was building shoulders strong enough for what your prayers were asking to carry. Now, I want to speak directly to you, the one who has lived long enough to feel the full weight of delay. Your years were not wasted. Your tears did not evaporate into thin air. Every decade that passed, without the promise showing up, that decade carried architecture. It was laying foundation beneath you that you could not see, because foundations are always underground before the building rises. Proverbs 4:18 says, "The path of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, shining brighter and brighter until full day." Not all at once. Brighter, and brighter, and brighter still. That is your life. That is your story. Look at Joseph. He did not need prison because he failed. He needed prison because power without formation becomes dangerous. God did not send Joseph to prison in anger. He sent him there in preparation. Every false accusation, every forgotten promise, every year behind bars was shaping a man whose character could sustain a nation. Look at David. God chose him in the field, anointed him as a teenager, and then made him wait in caves, in hiding, running for his life from the very king he would one day replace. David needed those caves before the crown, because a king who has never been hunted does not know how to lead people who are suffering. Look at Moses, 40 years in the wilderness, 40 years of obscurity, tending sheep in the desert when he had once walked the halls of Pharaoh's palace. And yet it was in that wilderness that God finally said, now, you are ready. Now I can use you." Do you see the pattern? God does not rush formation. A potter does not speed up the shaping just because the clay is impatient. He works it, he presses it, he smooths it, he fires it. Because the goal is never speed, the goal is strength. Yes, the weight hurt. I'm not going to stand here and pretend the years were easy. They were not. Some of what left your life felt like devastation. Relationships gone, opportunities that seemed to vanish, doors that closed and never reopened. But hear me, some of what left had to leave. Because weak supports cannot survive a greater calling. God was not taking from you. He was protecting the structure He was building in you. And now write this down. God was not just preparing the promise. He was preparing me. Say it again until it settles in your bones. So here is the question that should be living inside you right now. If the structure is finally ready, if the formation is complete, if the capacity has been built through every fire you walked through and survived, what is the last thing that must break before you can receive without shrinking back? Because some chosen people stand at the open door and still do not walk through, not because the door is locked, but because something on the inside is still holding them back. And that is exactly where we are going next. Because the next part of this message may expose the real reason some people, even after everything they endured, still hesitate at the threshold of everything heaven prepared for them. The weight built your shoulders. Now it is time to find out if you are ready to carry what is already waiting on the other side. Chosen one, I need to slow down right here, because what I am about to say is the part most people never hear. And it is the part that changes everything. We have talked about the waiting. We have talked about the preparation. We have talked about what God has been building inside you across all those silent, invisible years. But here is the question nobody asks. What happens when the door finally opens and you cannot make yourself walk through it? After years of lack, something happens to a person, something quiet, something dangerous. You stop expecting good things to last. You start treating every blessing like it has an expiration date. You pray for the promise with everything you have, and then when it appears at your threshold, something inside you whispers, "This cannot be for me." That whisper, that right there, that is the final obstacle. Not the enemy, not your past, not your age, not how many years have passed. The final barrier standing between you and everything heaven prepared is your own inability to receive it without apologizing for being the one it was meant for. Hear me clearly, Hulev. Some people have suffered so long that blessing now feels suspicious. Grace starts to feel like a trick. Favor starts to feel like a mistake someone in heaven made. You look around at your life, the years, the losses, the prayers that seem to go nowhere, and somewhere deep in your chest, a voice says, "Maybe this was for someone younger. Maybe I missed my window. Maybe too much time has passed. Maybe I am too old for God to start something new in me now." Beloved, I need to confront that voice directly. That is not humility. That is a lie dressed in humility's clothing. The Bible says in Romans 11:29, "The gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable." That word irrevocable means it cannot be taken back. It cannot expire. It does not have an age limit printed on the bottom. God does not look at your gray hair and quietly reassign your destiny to someone younger. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. 100. Moses was 80 when God said, "Now, go, lead 2 million people out of Egypt." 80 years old, and his greatest assignment had not even started yet. Anna the prophetess was 84 years old, standing in the temple, when she became the first person to publicly proclaim that the Messiah had arrived. So do not you dare tell me your best days are behind you. Here is what unworthiness actually does. It does not look like rebellion. It does not look like sin. It looks like modesty. It sounds like patience. It hides behind phrases like, "I don't want to be greedy. I don't want to ask for too much. Maybe other people need it more than I do." But underneath all of that, it is fear. Fear that if you reach out and take hold of what God placed in front of you, it will be pulled away. Because that is what life taught you, that good things disappear, that doors close, that people leave, that hope eventually embarrasses you. And so you stand at the threshold of your own breakthrough and you freeze. Some people spend years praying for the door. Then when the door opens, pain teaches them they do not belong in good rooms. The enemy could not stop the preparation, so he tries to poison the receiving. He could not keep God from building something beautiful in you across all those years of silence and struggle. So his final move, his last desperate strategy, is to convince you that what God built is not actually yours to keep. That is spiritual robbery, and it happens quietly, inside the most faithful people, in the holiest moments of their lives. The final test is not whether you can endure lack. You already passed that test. You endured more than most people ever will. The final test is whether you can receive love without apologizing for being the one it was sent to. You do not beg for inheritance like a stranger standing outside the gate. You receive it like family walking into what was always yours. Ephesians 3:20 says, God is able to do exceedingly, abundantly, above all that you ask or think. Not barely enough, not just sufficient, exceedingly, abundantly, above. That is what is waiting on the other side of your receiving, right now, quietly, not for anyone else, just between you and God. Say this out loud. I will not reject what God prepared for me. Say it like you mean it. Say it like you are done arguing with grace. Say it like 70 or 80, or whatever number of years you are carrying, did not disqualify you. It qualified you. If you are ready to stop negotiating with your own blessing, type, I receive in the comments. Because the next thing I am going to show you is what heaven's finally actually sounds like when it speaks over a life like yours. And when you hear it, you will never doubt your timing again. Most people hear the word finally and think it means God was frustrated, like heaven was up there, arms crossed, tapping its foot, watching you fail over and over again. But I need you to stop right there, because that is not the God of Scripture. That is not the Father who numbered every hair on your head. That is not the one who said in Jeremiah 29:11, For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. God's finally is not the language of disappointment. It is the language of completion. And there is a difference so vast between those two things that once you understand it, it will rewrite every painful year you have ever lived. Let me show you what heaven actually means when it says finally, because it is not one thing. It is layers. And every single layer has your name written on it. Layer 1. Finally, your roots are deep enough. You remember the last time life hit you hard and you collapsed. The last time one phone call, one diagnosis, one betrayal sent you spiraling for months. That version of you could not carry what God is about to release. Not because you were weak, but because roots take time. And God is not in the business of setting people up to be destroyed by their own blessing. Luke 8:13 speaks of those who receive the word with joy, but in time of testing, they fall away. Because they had no root. You have root now. Years of struggle built what no seminary could teach. You are no longer easily shaken. And heaven looked at that foundation and said, finally. Layer 2. Finally, your heart is still soft. This one should stop you cold. Because after everything you have been through, the losses, the betrayals, the unanswered prayers, the people who walked away, you had every reason to go hard, to go cold, to build walls so thick that nothing could get in. But you didn't. You are still tender, still capable of being moved, still able to weep for someone else's pain, even while carrying your own. Do you understand how rare that is? Pain hardens most people, but chosen one, it refined you. And Ezekiel 36:26 says, God promised to remove the heart of stone and give a heart of flesh. That is you. That softness is not weakness. That is the fingerprint of God still active on your life. Heaven looked at your open heart and said, finally, layer 3. Finally, you no longer need the blessing to feel worthy. This is the one that changes everything. Because God cannot safely give increase to someone whose identity depends on it. A person who needs the blessing to feel valued will worship the gift above the giver every single time. But somewhere in the waiting, something shifted in you. You stopped performing for approval. You stopped measuring your worth by what had not yet arrived. You began to stand in who God said you were before the breakthrough, before the open door, before anyone clapped. That is dangerous faith. That is the kind of faith that makes you safe to carry abundance without being destroyed by it. Heaven looked at that settled identity and said, finally, layer 4. Finally, you are ready in both character and capacity. Not just anointed, stabilized. There are people with tremendous gifting who are not yet ready because gifting without character is a vehicle with no steering wheel. It moves fast, but it cannot be trusted with the curves ahead. You have been in the shaping room, and Hebrews 12:11 tells us, no discipline feels pleasant at the time, but afterward it produces a harvest of righteousness. Afterward. That word means the process had a purpose, and you are standing in the afterward right now. Now hear this, and let it land in every part of you. God's finally is the sound of a craftsman stepping back from years of invisible labor. It is the sound of heaven saying, now the structure can hold the weight. Now the oil has a vessel. Now the door has a person prepared to walk through it. Now the promise will not crush the one who carries it. God did not say finally because he was late. He said finally because you were becoming ready. And readiness, real readiness, cannot be rushed. It cannot be faked. It cannot be manufactured by positive thinking or 5-step programs. It is built in the hidden place, in the silence, in the seasons nobody posts about, in the prayers that felt like they went nowhere but were actually going everywhere. If you have stayed with this message all the way to this point, do not keep it to yourself. Send it to the one person in your life who has almost given up. The one who is calling their season wasted. The one who stopped believing their name was still on heaven's list. Because this may be the moment that changes their mind. And as for you, chosen one, the question you must now sit with is this. If God has already said finally over your life, what are you still waiting for permission to become? Now I need you to lean in close. Because what I am about to tell you, most people never hear. Most people receive the revelation and walk away feeling good, feeling warm, feeling encouraged. And then Monday morning arrives, and nothing looks different. And they wonder if the word was even real. So hear me carefully, because this is where chosen people get tripped up. The next season does not always begin with a miracle you can photograph. It begins with something quieter, something deeper, something the world around you may not even notice at first. It begins inside you. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God. Not be busy, not be loud, not be impressive. Be still." Because the first evidence that your finally has arrived is not a check in the mailbox. It is not a phone call with good news. It is not a door swinging open dramatically in front of you. The first evidence is peace. A peace that does not match your circumstances. A peace that surprises even you. A peace that walks into the room of your mind and quietly sits down right in the middle of the chaos and refuses to leave. That peace is not weakness. That is preparation. Here is what the next season actually looks like for the chosen one who has crossed into finally. Clarity begins to increase. Things that confused you for years suddenly make sense. Decisions that paralyzed you become obvious. The fog lifts not all at once, but enough that you can see the next step clearly. Alignment replaces striving. You stop forcing doors. You stop exhausting yourself trying to manufacture outcomes. Because when God's timing arrives, movement stops feeling like warfare. Like a river that has been dammed up for years. Once the dam breaks, the water does not struggle to flow. It simply moves. Certain relationships fall away, quietly, cleanly, without drama. And you realize those connections were never built for the season you are entering. God is not being cruel. He is being precise. Old fears lose their grip. Things that once paralyzed you, you look at them now and feel something different. Not arrogance, not performance, just authority. Quiet, settled, heaven-given authority. And obedience, beloved, obedience becomes lighter. Because you are no longer obeying out of fear of punishment. You are obeying out of trust. And trust changes everything about how you move. But I need to be honest with you right now, because I love you too much to leave you with a half-truth. Some of you are sitting there waiting for the spectacular, waiting for the sudden, waiting for the kind of breakthrough that makes a great story to tell at dinner. And I am telling you, stop reducing what God is doing to what you can see in a single week. Galatians 6-9 says, "In due season we shall reap if we do not faint." Due season, not your season, not the season you designed, not the timeline you negotiated with heaven. Due season, which means God knows exactly when the structure can bear the harvest without collapsing under it. Dawn does not argue with darkness. It does not fight it. It does not negotiate with it. It simply arrives. And when it arrives, darkness has no choice but to yield. That is your next season. Not a battle, an arrival. So let me ask you something direct. And I need you to sit with this question. What if the breakthrough you have been begging God to send from the outside has already been released on the inside, and you have been too focused on the external to recognize it? What if the steadiness you feel right now is not resignation? What if it is readiness? Watch what shifts in your spirit after this message ends. Watch what conversations change. Watch what fears no longer own the room in your mind the way they used to. Watch what you no longer feel the need to chase. Because, chosen one, the next season will not be built on panic. It will not be built on striving, on proving, on performing for people who were never assigned to validate you anyway. The next season will be built on prepared peace. Romans 8:28 says, "All things work together for good to them that love God." All things, not some things, not the convenient things, all things. Every delay, every silence, every year that felt like it was stolen from you. God has been working every single piece together, including the pieces that broke your heart into something that will leave the watching world without words. Come back and testify when God confirms this word in your life, because your testimony will not just be yours. It will be the bread that feeds someone else's faith when they are too hungry to find their own. But before we close, there is one final charge you must hear, because how you respond to what comes next determines whether this word becomes comfort only or activation. And that charge is coming right now. Chosen one, stay with me right here, because what I am about to say is the reason heaven made sure this message found you today. Not yesterday, not next week. Today. You have been carrying a question so long it stopped feeling like a question. It became a wound, and that wound whispered the same lie every single morning. That God forgot your name, that the delay meant disqualification, that the silence meant absence. But I need you to look at your life one more time, not through the eyes of what you lost, but through the eyes of what you survived. You are still here, after everything that tried to take you out. You are still breathing, still believing, still standing on ground that was designed to swallow you whole. That is not coincidence. That is covenant. The Bible says in Psalm 66:12, "We went through fire and through water, but you brought us out into a place of abundance." Not around the fire, through it, not beside the water, through it. God never promised your road would be smooth. He promised your arrival would be certain. And chosen one, you have arrived. Now I need you to say this. Not just hear it, say it. The waiting did not waste me. The silence did not erase me. The hidden years did not bury me. God was building in me what my next season will require. Say it until your bones believe it. Say it until the part of you that stopped expecting finally wakes back up. Because here is the truth that religion rarely tells you. God was never waiting on your performance. He was waiting on your maturity. He was waiting until the vessel could finally hold the weight of what the prayer was asking for. You cannot pour an ocean into a cracked cup. So, he took his time. He sealed the cracks. He strengthened the walls. He deepened the foundation. And now heaven looks at you and says finally. Not finally as in frustration. Finally as in completion. Finally as in now, you are ready to carry what I always destined for your hands. Let me pray over you right now. Father, in the name of Jesus, I lift up every chosen one under the sound of this word. Every soul who spent years wondering if you had moved on. Every heart that carried obedience like a heavy coat in summer, faithful but exhausted. Every man and woman who kept showing up to a life that seemed to give nothing back. God, break the spirit of unworthiness off them right now. Break the lie that says the delay was their fault. Break the false humility that makes them shrink from receiving what you already prepared. Break the fear that whispers this breakthrough will be taken away. Lord, let them feel right now, in this moment, the shift. Let their spirit recognize what their mind has been too tired to see, that the season has changed, that the door is no longer ahead of them. It is open beneath their feet. Heal every misread silence. Heal every wound that delay left behind. Restore the years. Restore the expectation. Restore the holy boldness that suffering tried to steal. And Father, let them receive. Not just believe, receive. In Jesus' name. Amen. Chosen one, open your eyes, because I need you to understand something that will change the way you walk out of this moment. You did not endure all of that simply to survive. You endured it to become someone who could carry something. Habakkuk 2-3 says, "Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay." It was never late. It was always on time. His time. And his time has come. This is not the end of your waiting story. This is the beginning of your carrying season. The weight you feel on your shoulders right now is not burden. It is assignment. It is heaven loading you with everything you prayed for, everything you believed for, everything you nearly gave up on, all at once. Because God does not give the harvest in pieces. When the season turns, it turns completely. So here is what I need you to do right now. If this word is yours, type "I am ready" in the comments. Let heaven and earth witness your declaration. Let your own eyes see the words, and let your spirit come into agreement. If you believe God has been preparing you in the secret place like this video, not for the algorithm, as your act of faith, as your yes. Subscribe if you want more messages that go where most teaching never dares to go, into the hidden places, the wounded places, the places people call forgotten, but God calls chosen. And share this with someone tonight. Someone who has been quiet lately. Someone who stopped talking about their dreams. Someone who needs to hear that God's silence was never emptiness. It was the sound of something being built. Chosen one. God has been waiting a long time, not to see whether you could suffer forever, but to see whether your soul could finally hold what your prayers have been asking for. And now, heaven looks at everything you are, everything you survived, everything you became in the dark, and says, finally, You are ready. Now, carry it.